Hello, environmental science class. This is the content video for Unit 2, Section 4. We're going to talk about what makes certain natural resources more important than others, or at least considered more important than others, and also the factors that are used to determine the importance of certain environmental concerns. I know this sounds kind of wordy, but it's not that complicated. It's just a bunch of gray areas, all right? And that'll become apparent the more we look at it and talk about it. So to talk about all this, we do need to cover something called a decision-making model. This is a conceptual model, so it is one of those types of models we covered, 4 or 5 weeks ago now. It's been a little bit, I know. So it generally follows this flow chart on the right underneath my video. So we're going to gather information, we're going to consider values, we're going to explore the consequences of the decision, and then finally we will make a decision, right? So values is going to be one of our vocab words. It is a change based on, let me rephrase that. So values are principles or standards that are considered important, and they change based on who holds them, right? I may have different values than you. We both might have different values with somebody who is 70 years old and lives on the other side of the planet. All right. Values are community driven. They are environmentally driven. So where you grew up with, who you grew up with. They may be religious based. They may be scientific based. They may be logic based. All right. They are very fluid. They change. I do not hold the same values now that I did when I was your age, or even that I held when I was 10 years younger than I am now. And that is a sign of growth, that we reevaluate what we consider important as we grow and as we learn. All right, decision-making models also can be used for short-term planning and the long-term planning, right? I can use this to figure out what I'm going to have for lunch versus what my retirement plans are, okay? It doesn't matter how long the project is, you can still use this. So it also looks a lot like the scientific method, right? We're going to gather information, we're going to do our research, right? We are going to pose some hypothetical questions instead of making hypotheses, so that those would allow us to explore the consequences. And exploring the consequences is kind of like making an experiment, but in general, you can't make an experiment for the decision-making models. Decision-making models may gather information based on experiments. 3D modeling and large-scale modeling of populations or environmental impact are one of the ways that that information can be brought into the people who need to make information or make decisions based on them. Here is a table of, I think, 9 different values that might be considered in a decision-making model. You don't have to memorize all of these, so don't freak out about it. I just want you to get a general idea of them and maybe look at a few of your own, right? So let's walk through these together. Aesthetic values look at what looks good, what is beautiful, what is pleasing to the eye. Does it make sense in the space? Does it draw your attention? Economic values consider only the gain or loss of money and jobs, and those are important things, right? We need money to survive in a capitalist economy, right? Environmental values look at the protection of natural resources, and they're kind of central to what we're going to talk about in class this year, so might be a good one to think about. Educational values look at the accumulation and sharing of knowledge. So just researching for research's sake, finding out information because you want to know it. Ethical and moral values are very fluid, and they change very, I don't want to say easily, but they differ from person to person a lot of times. And they just consider what is a right thing to do or a wrong thing to do. Values concerning health look at the maintenance of human health. So that is kind of redundant, I know. You want people who live in an area or frequent the space or whatever you're making a decision on to live good, healthy lives. Right? You don't want to make them sick. You don't want to cause them to have a danger of losing a limb. Moving on, recreational values. Consider human leisure activities. What are you doing in your free time? Are you playing golf? Are you riding a bike? Are you just going on a drive? Are you taking a walk in a park? Are you going swimming? Those are recreational activities. Scientific values are this is a very broad spectrum here, and it's just our understanding of the natural world. So it covers some of the other ones we've already talked about, like environmental, as well as health. So we are looking at what we already know about the world around us when we talk about scientific values and how that can be controlled or altered. Social and cultural values sometimes mesh or reflect ethical and moral values, but we're looking at maintaining or building up human communities and preserving their values and traditions in general. A lot of times this is considered with indigenous peoples, so the people who live there naturally, like the Native Americans or the Sudan herders and farmers that we talked about in our last content video. So these are the people who genetically have lived there, not necessarily on an individual scale, but a generational scale. They didn't immigrate or migrate. This is a grid layout or a chart of some considerations made for setting aside a nature preserve in Valley County. I'm going to have some readings kind of related to this available to you guys soon. It's probably going to be next week when you watch this. So I haven't quite made that decision yet on what day it is, but probably next week. So you can see that in the columns, we've got environmental, economic, and recreational. So these are those three. Those are just three of the values, right? There could be more of these. We're just looking at three of them for the purposes of our talk today. If we look at the rows, those are the horizontal ones, right? With the blue lines between them. So here, 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 and down here. I know the slide covers it, so I'm going to not move my mouse too much. So these look at the positive and negatives for short-term and long-term, right? So this is looking at the consequences of these options in light of either the short-term or the long-term. And long-term here is going to be years, not months, right? It could even be decades. So I'm not going to read through this. You can pause the video now and read through it. All right, you should have paused the video just there and read over this chart. If you're having a hard time reading it, send me an email today, and I will send you a larger version of this. It just doesn't fit very well on my chart, on my slides, especially with my face on them. So a couple of the ones that I want to pull out are the positive and negative for environmental and the positive and negative for economic. The recreational ones are going to be very opinionated on how important they are. So I want to talk about these right now. So positive short-term consequences for environment is that we are going to have habitat destruction slow down and stop, right? So if we have a nature preserve, there aren't going to be housing developments put in. There's not going to be a strip mall put in there. They aren't going to pave it and make a parking lot or a highway. That's a good thing, right? We want to preserve the environment for environmental consequences. But if we shift gears and look at economic instead, positive is that the people who owned the land are going to receive money for it. The government is going to pay for it, so they're going to get some money out of it right away. They can also say that the property owners who have land just outside the area that might be set aside for a nature preserve are going to be able to develop the area with fewer restrictions because the nature preserve is going to allow for a little bit of political maneuvering in the form of zoning. Zoning is how the government says different plots of land can be used, and it's usually in light of environmental and economic standards. So negative short-term consequences for the environmental values. So negative is bad things, right? So environmental controls are made less strict in parts of the county outside the preserve area. So because the county believes that they are doing some big environmental good with the nature preserve, they will allow other areas of the county to be a little bit more lax. And we can see that these two mirror each other, right? So this one mirrors this one. They are opposites. All right? So similarly, we'll see that this positive short-term consequence in the environment will lead to this negative short-term consequence. So we said that the area is going to be slowed down and stopped with the habitat destruction, but that's because these property owners can't develop that land. They only took the buyout instead of being able to make money long-term on that. We also can see that taxpayers are going to pay higher taxes to buy that preserved land. So this buyout money comes from somewhere. All right? Looking at a longer lens to this, we can see the consequences become a little bit more, I apologize for that, a bit more structured. So the positive long-term consequences for our bird population, warblers, the population increases and it doesn't become endangered. So these warblers, a specific species of bird, are able to thrive and mate freely in the nature preserve. Similarly, other species of organisms are going to be protected. They do not go into detail about the other species because their big concern is that warbler population because it's at risk of becoming endangered. The positive long-term consequence of an entire habitat being preserved is kind of a catch-all because the entire habitat covers animals and plants, and as well as even the bacteria in the soil. The negative effects, though, are that habitat outside the preserve is going to be damaged by development, maybe even overdevelopment. All right? So the development that might happen in the nature preserve is going to be concentrated in other portions of the county because there's just not as much land to go around. Economically, those long-term positive consequences increase the value of the area. So we're going to see housing prices go up around the area. If you look just south of here at Zenith Academy High School, we have Slate-run Metro Park, which once it was established, did see housing market around it in Canal Winchester. Those housing prices went up. Same thing for houses around the Groveport Metro Parks and the Reynoldsburg Metro Parks. Well, part of the Columbus Metro Parks. Another positive long-term consequence is that businesses moved to Valley County because it has a lot of recreational opportunities. So your employees are going to be able to relax at the park, at this nature preserve. Because they're able to relax outside of work, they're going to be better employees. So they're going to have overall job growth because the employees' quality of life is going to be better. Similarly to this long-term environmental positive consequence, we have the warbler is not listed as endangered, which avoids stricter controls on land use. So if the warbler population had become endangered, the county or the state or even the federal government might have stepped in and made much higher controls on how that land could be used. All right. The other half of our learning goals for today are to look at natural resource importance. We haven't done a lot with natural resources yet for this year. All right. So remember that natural resources are anything that can be pulled from the land, the sea, or the air, or even space that is natural. All right? So anything from gold ore to hydroelectric energy and wind farms that make wind energy, right? Both make electricity, but from different sources, to crude oil and petroleum and antimony or aluminum for raw materials that are used in manufacturing. All right. So some of the different ways that we consider their importance is the access to them. So this doesn't just mean where are they globally, but how easy are they to get to? As we are nearing the end of fossil fuel use here in the next 30 to 40, 50 years, our access to them is going to get much harder. So it's harder to actually get crude oil from the ground. And we're going to have to move towards different deposits, which require more work to get, which is going to make it more expensive at the end consumer, right? You and I don't pull all the oil from my car out of the ground and then refine it. I go to a gas station. I'm an end user. And if that oil is on the other side of the world, it makes it a lot more difficult for me to get to it, right? So I rely on more and more things to transport it. Non-renewable versus renewable is what it says on the tin, right? A non-renewable energy source or natural resource will replenish over time. So it will come back. It will grow back. It will continue being of use. Like solar energy is a renewable resource because as far as we're concerned, the sun isn't going to stop shining anytime soon. That's going to be, millions of years later, not right now. So for our human scale, right, that is a non-renewable resource. Wind energy is that's a renewable energy source. Wind energy, because wind just keeps blowing, right? We don't stop the wind. We don't use up the wind when we have a wind farm. It is renewable. Timber and wood are considered renewable resources as long as planting is done with the harvesting. If that's not being done, it is a non-renewable resource. So it's kind of in this gray area. Pulling food from the sea through fisheries is a non-renewable resource because there's only so much fish in the sea. If we overfish, we may lose a whole fishery, which has happened a lot in the North Atlantic. Another issue to consider is how much is left. If there's not as much of a resource left, it may be considered more important now, but once it is expired, once we've run out of it, it isn't going to be as important because we just can't get any more of that. Recycling is mentioned here because we may, as humans, right, be able to pull or obtain resources from things we've already used. Electronics recycling is big in this. Aluminum is big in this. Steel is big in this recycling factor because we can just reuse what we've already used. We can use it again and again as long as it's being recycled. Most aluminum in the U.S. is from recycled sources, and I think steel is just over 50%. I'm going to put this infograph up as a different file so you can see it. I just want to talk about it, and you can kind of get the general idea even if you can't see all the numbers and words here. So red in the center represents raw materials that are generally metals, and they are used in manufacturing processes. So like I said before, antimony, also indium, silver, copper, titanium, tantalum, phosphorus, and aluminum. We're going to run out of the natural ores, O-R-E-S, in the ground that we get these things from eventually. And we're going to have to only get our sources from recycling after that. But we're not recycling 100% of that material. So eventually we will run out. Antimony is used in batteries as well as some pharmaceuticals. Titanium is used in aircraft and in armor for tanks or for infantry around the world. Copper and silver are used for electrical as well as pipes. Tantalum is used in mobile phones. Phosphorus is important for fertilizing and pesticides. Aluminum, I mean, you guys probably have a piece of aluminum within reach. The body on this laptop is aluminum. Part of my phone is aluminum, the body of it. There's a lot of pop cans. This is everywhere, right? The blue are fuels: coal, oil, and gas. Gas here is not gasoline, it's natural gas, methane. And these are useful for powering things, right? They are fossil fuels. The yellow or gold are ecosystems, and what we can pull from those is going to slowly deteriorate as we use them up. All right, so this looks at things like agricultural land, coral reefs, and rainforests. So looking at it, our mineral resources here in red are going to deteriorate with antimony at 8 years, indium at 12, and silver at 17. So this is 17 years from 2012, so not right now, right? So subtract 8 years from all of that. So antimony is going to run out anytime now. This was a forecast from 12 years ago. A lot of this from 8 years ago. A lot of this information is still pretty standard. I just liked this graph. All right. Moving up, we have the next two big things, tantalum and titanium, lasting until almost 2060. But once they're gone, it's going to have a large impact on worldwide manufacturing. Just past 2085, we're going to run out of phosphorus, and past 2090, we're going to run out of aluminum. And this is new materials pulled from the ground, right? So this doesn't factor in recycling. But if we continue looking at how the fossil fuels and ecosystems are used up, by 2030, it is forecasted that the Arctic, that's the North Pole, right, isn't going to have any ice in the summer. So the Northwest Passage that you might have learned about in history is going to be completely clear of ice. And while that's nice that it does open up another shipping lane, that ice is important for carbon sequestration. So carbon dioxide gets trapped in the ice, as well as movement of different fauna, so animals. By 2050, a third of land, plant, and animal species are projected to go extinct due to climate change because of the warming weather and its impact on things like coral reefs. I know this number because it's important. The dangerous 2% Celsius warming threshold, it's no longer at 2060, it's at 2070 as of the recording of this. So it's going to be, slightly skewed over here instead of over here. And by 2090, the Indonesian rainforest will be gone. And by 2200, the Brazilian rainforest is going to be gone. All right. Yes, that does loop all the way around twice. So these things don't come back. Once they're gone, they're gone. The Brazilian rainforest, a lot of work is being done to keep it intact and growing and preserving that environment, that whole ecosystem. But due to logging and burning of the jungle, it's deteriorating. It's being lost. All right, so today we talked about what makes certain natural resources more important than others. We also talked about what factors are used to determine the importance of certain environmental concerns. I'm going to have you guys reflect on these in the forum today. Not much work today because this video was a little bit longer. Have a good afternoon, evening, morning if you got this done early enough. And if you have any questions, be sure to send me an email.